Welcome to the Base Path Podcast, brought to you by New England Baseball Journal. I'm your host, Dan Guttenplan. This is the time of year where baseball players all over New England are trying to figure out what to do from a strength training perspective. And today, our guest is co-owner of Cressey Sports Performance, Massachusetts, and the director of performance there, John O'Neill. John, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, Dan, thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking with you guys.
Yeah, it seems like the strength training piece for baseball has evolved so much over the last, 10 years or maybe even 10 to 15 years. You've been at Cressey Sports Performance since 2018. It seems like now, when an athlete comes to these types of facilities, they get the individual assessment to kind of see where they're at rather than having everybody kind of do one structured program. How does it work? Say an athlete were to come to you and say, hey, I'm trying to work December, January, February to kind of get ready for the March, April, and summer season. What is the process of kind of getting them structured in a program?
Sure. Yeah. So you touched on one thing, and I'll start with that. So the evolution of strength and conditioning in the baseball world. So I played baseball, played a little bit in college. I graduated high school in 2009. So at that point, it was rare if a baseball player was going to the weight room in the off season, or if they were going to the weight room for baseball, right? A lot of them were going for football, going for, bodybuilding type stuff, but going for baseball was very unique at that point. It's obviously changed a lot. I'm an assistant coach at Lincoln Sudbury High School as well. And so like last year being on field in the spring, you look around the field and a majority of kids are doing something in the off season for baseball at this point. And a lot of them on the S&C side. And if they're not doing it on the S&C side, they're probably doing it on the skill side. So the hitting, pitching, et cetera. And a lot of them are doing all of that. So it is very unique at the varsity level at this point to not be doing something. And now what we do, everyone is on an individualized program. So when people come in, we try to meet people, where they are in terms of, it's not a generic program. It's not, let's say, today's January 14th. So it's not, all right, here's what everyone is doing on January 14th. It's more so, all right, what have you done recently? What do you need to be ready for? Combined with, all right, what do people who want to play your position at your level, with your skill set, what are they typically doing right now? It is a process of evaluating, obviously, the individual, but evaluating the circumstance in terms of figuring out how much time you have, figuring out what they can do, figuring out what limitations they might have, figuring out what they need to work on. So there's a lot of variables that go into creating that program. But big picture, like you said, there's been a huge evolution in terms of what's happening. I would say at this point, when I started, so I interned at CSP in 2014, started in 2017 full time. So in 2014, there was not really strength and conditioning on Instagram, or there definitely wasn't TikTok. And so a lot of what we were showing people was completely new to them. Like they hadn't seen exercises like that. And certainly before that as well, but I'll just give the context that I have. Since then, that's evolved a lot. So a lot of times we get a high school kid, 2025 now, they've already seen a lot of stuff, whether it's, from companies like ours or different places that are online. They've already seen a bunch of stuff online of, all right, here's this exercise. And where we fit in is figuring out how to put these pieces of the puzzle together and how to fit them to the person. Because at this point, everyone, your 15, 16, 17-year-olds have all been exposed to what strength and conditioning for baseball looks like. So in some ways, we do compete with social media. Even though we use it to our advantage, we do compete with it in terms of trying to get a high school kid's ear.
Yeah, when I was, a competitive athlete, this was back in, the 90s and early 2000s, it was almost like every sport had those standard, the bench press, the squat, the cleans, you jump rope to warm up and do some pull-ups at the end, and then you're out of there in like an hour. And now it's so much more of, every time I'm in a strength training complex or facility watching these guys. It's, there's so many more options. There's so much more focus on nutrition and recovery. It's a lot of, movements that you see on the baseball field, whether it's medicine ball twists, like, trying to get power from your legs. What is it? What's changed? What type of exercises are you having guys make up deficits in the gym right now?
Sure. Yeah. So I think definitely the shift away from, what you said in terms of like everyone, bench, squat, deadlift, and you mentioned jump rope and some other things like, those are all things we still use and they all have a time and place. But I would say it's more of the focus on trying to get somebody the easiest path or the path of least resistance towards their goals. And so I'm not going to spend 3 months teaching someone a really complex movement that they maybe get good at in the last 2 weeks of the off season.
Hmm.
When I can, put size and strength on them with something that I can teach them in the first week or two and say, hey, let's get really good at this. Because at the end of the day, the exercise selection doesn't matter that much from a standpoint of like not everybody needs to be doing certain exercises, right? So I'll use the example of a high school kid, and that's majority of our business right now, and I assume it's a decent percentage of the listeners as well. But a majority of them are undersized in relation to their goals. They are actively growing or they have grown a lot in the last year or two. And our goal is to basically make them the size that they need to be to compete at the next level, whatever that is. If they want to play varsity baseball, if they are already varsity baseball players and they want to play in college, especially with this is a recent change, but it's really been a post-COVID change of college baseball being so much older than it used to be. It's not, hey, let's compare this 17-year-old to this 21-year-old. It's, hey, we need to set you up to potentially compete against 22, 23, 24-year-olds. And so it is a little different in terms of comparisons. So you might be a big high school kid, but you are still a small college kid. And so that's the first thought. Now, if we have a kid who's already big and strong and looks the part, maybe that's a situation where we're doing more sprint work, more jumping, more plyometrics, more medicine ball work, etc. But everyone who trains with us is doing some component of all of those, but just in different amounts, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're an undersized high school kid, you still need to sprint to be able to compete in baseball, right? So you can't just lift weights only and try to get big and strong and show up at practice on the first day or show up at tryouts on the first day and not have run a sprint all off season, right? So we're still doing some of that. It's just the amount of who gets how much in each category varies a lot.
And what about, you hear a lot of these parents who they want to get their kids bigger and stronger. It used to be like, don't worry about strength training until you're done growing. But now there's been a shift in that where, you want to teach the right mechanics. You want to make sure these guys understand how to make the strength training or the weight room, help them on the field. When do you start to kind of integrate players into a strength training program? And what is the process of kind of getting them up to the high school level?
Sure. Yeah. So it's more a classification on what the goal of strength training is. And so, when you are 16, 17, 18, if you want to try to put size and strength on and that's the main goal, you can make that the main goal. Your body's physically ready to be able to do that. When you are, 12, 13, 14, you can do that a little bit, but doing that as the primary goal might not be your best route of success. And so, strength training has a huge impact on coordination and learning your body in space and learning how to move your body and learning how to do stuff like in a baseball context. So being able to change directions, being able to plant off a foot, being able to hold position, whether it's on the mound, in the box, on the base paths, all that stuff like that is derived on a combination of coordination and having the strength to do it in those positions. And so at a younger age, like we have some 11, 12, 13-year olds. We have two travel baseball spaces, actually, or two spaces in travel baseball. places that we train the kids out of, and those we start a little younger in more of a group context. And so 10, 11, you see a lot of 10 and 11 and 12s in those. But it's more built around learning coordination, learning how to do things, so that when you do hit that growth spurt and your body is ready to really put size on, you don't have to now learn how to do this stuff. You already know how to do all of it. And so some of our best success stories are kids that start with us when they're 13, and the first year or two, maybe they don't put a ton of size or strength on, but they learn how to do things really well and they start moving really efficiently. They become better athletes because of it, and then they hit that growth spurt. They turn 15 or 16, and all of a sudden they gain a bunch of size and strength. So it's just a competitive advantage at that age, but maybe not for the same reason it's a competitive advantage when you're 17.
Right. And technology has really kind of inundated the baseball space, with Rapsodo and everything else that they're measuring exit velocity in cages now and things like that. What about in the weight room? Are you using like accelerometers or anything like that where you can measure, velocity of lifts? What kind of technology are you leaning into and using at Cressey?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll speak on the tech as a whole. So, we obviously have, or we have pitching on site. We have hitting in our building as well. Pitching is a huge part of our business. And I would say that, more than ever, and I think this is a social media influence, like kids understand and know what they're looking for on their TrackMan data, for example, right? So, even 5 years ago, it was how hard am I throwing? That was the only question. And now it's a lot of stuff on vertical break, horizontal break, release point, all different stuff that kids are asking about on TrackMan and using it to their advantage. And you see it when you watch high school baseball now. You see some breaking stuff that you didn't used to see, and it used to be just okay if you can spin it over the plate, it's probably a good pitch. But now a lot of these kids are crafting these pitches in the off season. So that end of it is a huge difference maker from a technology standpoint. That's more on the pitching side. You asked about the weight room side. So we time a lot of sprints. That's probably the first one. I've been in this field for about a decade, and I spent about 5 years trying to cue and coach and learn how to be a better sprint coach, and learn how to help kids get faster and try to get them the perfect cue or in the right position. And here's the right drill they need. And then we got timing gates, and I very quickly realized that the timing gates are a way better coach than I am, right? So it's oh, if you get objective feedback on, hey, if I did this, I got faster. I did this, I got slower. That's a much quicker path to actually retaining. Like, okay, if I do this, I'll keep getting faster. So we time a lot of sprints, especially this time of the off season. So our typical high school off season. So if you take your average high school kid, they're sprinting, and let's say they start with us in September or October. They're sprinting once or twice a week through the fall. Then it becomes 3 days a week in December, January, and then it's 4 days a week their last month or so of the off season. We're basically trying to set them up for the idea that hey, you are ready to sprint five to 6 days a week, which you're going to need to do come baseball season. And a lot of that's timed, and so we try to get kids on our timing gates as often as we can, get feedback to them. It creates a much more competitive environment. You get real objective feedback on how you're doing or how you're progressing and stuff. That's the biggest one. It's also the simplest one, right? You set them up, you have a kid run through it, you get the time to the iPad. Additionally, we'll use a little bit of force plate data. We do a little bit of you mentioned accelerometer, so we call it velocity-based training, so VBT. We do a little bit of that. We actually probably do less of it than we did 3 or 4 years ago. It's not because we value it less. I think we're just better at picking who and when to use it with. Now, I would say with the college and pro guys, I use more of it. But with the high school kids, I'm probably not using a ton of it. It's a select handful of high school kids that have been lifting weights for a few years, and the goal is not necessarily to push more weight. It's now to push lighter weight at a faster speed. But the timing gates are pretty universal. Like, hey, every high school kid is going to have a bunch of reps on these. And mostly in our space, it's mostly tens and then what we call flying tens. In our space, it's a 10-yard run in into timing the last 10. So it's basically either a 10-yard sprint or a 20-yard sprint but you're timing the last 10 yards in the 20.
Hmm. It's like the feed the cat strategy where it's like, tracking, recording, all that, and just letting them self motivate because they see their own results.
It is. It is 100% that. Yeah, it's funny how little I have to coach sprint technique now when I have timing gates compared to how much I used to 5 years ago when we didn't. And it was just like, all right, I think that looks faster. Let me try to tell him this, and I think it'll look faster again. And you're talking fractions of a second. So like in a 10-yard sprint, you're talking a 1.6 versus a 1.65, and so. The naked eye is not great at telling the difference between those. And I'll actually tell you this. So we brought the timing gates to Lincoln Sudbury last year towards the end of preseason, and it's basically like, hey, we're going to get home to first times on everybody official, and that's going to help dictate, who's a pinch runner, who's a courtesy runner, et cetera. And some of the results are surprising because you get a lot of the smaller kids who look like they're moving their feet very fast, and then you get them on the gates, and you're like, that wasn't a very fast time. You get the bigger kid who, has long strides, and their feet don't look that fast, and all of a sudden they have a better time. So having some objectivity towards that is very valuable.
Yeah, it's difficult to do. Like that's always something I feel like baseball trainers or our strength coaches are juggling is because especially for pitching, like there's all these different motions, and people have ideas of what you want to be right, you want to be over the top if you're on the mound, and or you don't want to be at 3/4, like different things that they think will stress the arm or cause injuries. But then when you try to change it, the pitcher's out of his natural motion and it's creating more stress on his arm and he gets hurt trying to clean up his motion. Is it a juggling act of, hey, we're identifying these things that are a little unusual about your motion and we want you to kind of trend toward the norm versus, hey, if that's what's natural for you, go for it. We don't want to stress you by, trying to change that.
Yeah, so I think the changes in strength and conditioning and the changes in how pitching is coached at the youth level have reflected each other pretty nicely over the last decade. So you mentioned something about arm slots, so I'll just piggyback off that. But um, you see a huge rise in velocity over the baseball field as a whole from the major league level down, and I think part of it, and it's a multifactorial question as to why everybody's throwing harder. I think part of it is allowing variation in arm slots and deliveries, as long as kids are doing certain things in the delivery. So as long as they're loading from loading from their lower half and releasing the ball in a position that's not putting their arm in harm's way. If the arm slot reflects the rest of the delivery and it reflects the person, then it's probably okay. So I'll use the example. So like we have kids that throw from anywhere from like a sidearm slot to all the way over the top and everything in between. And it's very much like our strength and conditioning approach in that the strength and conditioning approach is like, all right, how much of certain, of different qualities do you need and what do you need to chase? And how do you naturally present? And I think the best example of that's on the mound. So there are a lot of very successful guys from a lower slot that maybe 10 years ago would have been told, hey, raise your arm. And that potentially would have caused a shoulder issue. Whereas all of a sudden, hey, he was able to develop at a slightly lower arm slot from a younger age, and he's throwing much harder now. And when you watch Major League Baseball, I know it's a little different now because you watch some games and teams use 7, 8 different pitchers, but you might see 7 or 8 different, slightly different arm slots. And it's the same thing all the way down. And I think that's a very positive thing. One of the things we'll use, and so for context, like I don't run the pitching side. I technically oversee it. We have a guy, Blaze Martinez, and another pitching coach, Kevin McGowan, that run the pitching side. But one of the things I know our business uses a lot is, this idea of pull downs or throws off a shuffle, or different plyo ball drills or weighted ball drills that basically help us learn what your best arm slot is. And so if you get a kid on a shuffle and throw, they're gonna start to self-organize into the arm slot where they feel most efficient, because it's a little bit sped up. It's forcing them to get their arm in the spot that they can in a shorter time. When you get a kid on a mound and do more like static drills in terms of holding position and holding, I don't think this is on video, but holding an arm arm upright in position or holding a balance point or stuff like that. I think it forces kids to be a little robotic and it forces them into an arm slot that maybe they're not the most efficient in.
Hmm.
And so like doing stuff that's basically more athletic based throws allows us to learn about that person's arm slot. And then it's okay, we're going to take that arm slot and develop that on the mound. And I think you see that all the way down. So from Major League Baseball down through the youth level, it's okay to throw from slightly different slots, as long as you can, you're not developing pain in your arm and you're also effective. So you're getting outs and you're able to do it over a longer period of time.
Yeah, baseball's unusual in the recovery piece of it too, because unlike other sports like baseball, well, I guess football is a little bit like this, where you're giving your maximum effort once a week, basically. If you're a pitcher, you get 5, 6 days of rest after a start. And then you've got your time in between where you might be throwing from a mound or long toss and things like that, but it's not maximum effort. How important is that recovery piece? What are some things that you've found that are really helping pitchers? Because now at the youth level, and you probably see this even at the high school level, between, and maybe not at the high school level because you're not really playing travel ball during the high school season, but at the youth level, it seems like so many of these kids now are playing both travel and town leagues at the same time. Some of these leagues have rules that you can't pitch in both, some don't. How important is that recovery piece, and what are you finding that really helps guys to kind of get back out there close to 100% the next time they take the mound?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's a bigger picture question on arm injuries in general, right? Like the
Yeah.
purpose of recovery would be to, get back on the mound and do so healthily, or do so and be able to stay healthy. Um, the I guess the if I could answer the question of, why are we seeing more arm injuries in one quick bullet point, I think I'd go and make a lot of money somewhere doing it because I think everybody's trying to answer that question, right? And there are a lot of factors in it. I'll use trends, or things uh, that most arm injuries have in common. And so the first one is not really having a plan that has some congruency. So basically a plan that stays the same no matter what the results are, and the changes are slight tweaks. They're not overhauls after every outing, right? It's not like, oh, you had a bad outing, let's change your mechanics and let's do that again. And oh, maybe let's try long tossing significantly all the time when you weren't before. So just having some plan that scales off itself. That's the first thought. And so when kids are playing on multiple teams, that can be very hard to do, right? So maybe some teams they play for don't warm up at all. Maybe some teams that they play for, has everybody long toss. Maybe another team, pitches kids 5, 6 innings on a Saturday, and then they play for the second team. They're throwing 3 innings on Tuesday, and so as much as I think the industry has done a good job educating on pitch counts, we haven't necessarily done a great job on educating on what happens in between, or how to communicate that from place to place. So I'll use the example of, in training, if you're not used to, lifting heavier weights, let's say, and you go in there and you just do like the heaviest session you can, you're going to be sore for a while, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's okay. That's part of what should have happened, but just taking a week off and then going right back to it, you're just going to keep getting sore, right? You have to do something in between that scales you back towards that. And so we'll use something called that what we refer to as a high-low model. We didn't invent it; it's from the track and field world. But it's basically the idea that you have higher stress days and lower stress days. And so the answer isn't to do a high stress day, do a week of low stress days, and then do another high stress day. It's to pick and choose your spots where you're, developing arm strength, arm speed, in between those outings. And early in the off season, it's building up a bunch of lower stress days, through catch play, building up into long toss, before doing stuff like pull downs, before doing mound work. And then once you start doing mound work, or you're doing it once a week with some lower stress days in between, then you start doing it twice a week with some lower stress days in between. So just having some kind of plan. I see a lot of, kids who play for different organizations where Oh, my arm's sore from practice the other day. Oh, cool. What'd you do? Oh, we did a bunch of pull downs. Oh, what'd you do the 2 weeks before that? Oh, I hadn't been throwing. It's like, well, that's gonna hurt. Like it should hurt. It's actually a normal stress response if you do something at a max effort after not doing anything related the weeks prior. And so having some kind of plan, and I think the travel ball world as a whole has gotten a lot better about it. Encouraging kids to play light catch on a consistent basis before ramping them up. But we still see a lot of like, oh, I threw a 50 pitch bullpen, but I haven't thrown a baseball in a week prior to that. That's an issue. So just trying to have some kind of plan with throwing for throwing with us, we look at it as you're either in or you're out. And so people always ask about like how much time should my kid take off? And there was a time when we had everybody take 8 to 12 weeks off. That was based off some research that came out in 2011, 2012 from the Andrews Institute. And I still think that does hold some merit at the youth level. If you're, middle school or below, take 8 weeks off, take 10 weeks off, take 12 weeks off. You don't need to see your pitching coach every week through October, November, December if your season doesn't start till April, and your season, is 25 games. Now at the high school level, if a kid is a freshman, that number might go down to 6, 8 weeks. If a kid's a junior and trying to get recruited that summer, that number might be 4 weeks. But we do try to have some kind of off period. The other thing we do a lot of now that we didn't used to is have what we call deload periods. So it's periods where you're just playing catch at 60 feet, just to retain the coordination of throwing a baseball. 3 days a week for 60 feet for a month, and that might be your first month back to throwing. It's not a race to get back to the mound in November, December. But everyone is a little bit individual. Some of our pro guys take a full 4 weeks off. Some don't take any. They've done it in the past. They don't like how they feel when they do it. And so we just give them a deload period where they play catch at 60 feet for 2 to 4 weeks. But it is having some kind of plan. And where I see us fitting in as a piece of the puzzle for a lot of people is being the voice that they can trust with creating a plan. And so just an overarching plan of, all right, here's the throwing approach that you're going to take for the next 4 months of the off season. And when we do that and kids buy in, they tend to be kids that are also going to want to have structure like that in season. Whereas coaching in season, you still see a lot of like, oh, I didn't pitch well the other day. I need to get back on the mound and throw a bunch of pitches to work on that. And it's like, hey, let's evaluate why it didn't go well. Let's work on it, but let's make sure it still fits into your plan. And a lot of times, I think you mentioned with kids playing on multiple teams, they just don't know. Parents just don't know who to ask. They don't know, should I ask the town ball coach, the travel ball coach, the private sector pitching coach, like what should the approach be, and how do we get everyone on the same page with, hey, here's what he's doing throwing wise this offseason. And it is a difficult battle. It's one that we, is kind of, I think, like the bread and butter of our business in terms of being like a singular voice for people to just say, all right, what should his offseason look like? Let's map this out and let's try to execute that plan over the next, 2, 3, 4 months.
Yeah, you seem to be somebody who likes to kind of record and track things in terms of the speed and lifts and things. What about nutrition and sleep? I know now you can get a lot of support on tracking that stuff on, watches, rings, things like that, where you're able to see your sleep. I don't know how accurate it is. It probably varies depending on your source. But how do you keep track of that? What are you stressing to your kids about the importance of nutrition and sleep?
Sure. Yeah. So that's definitely a good question, big picture question. I use an Aura ring. You guys see it on the camera here. Track sleep and stuff like that. That's more for myself. I don't care if people, use a wearable sleep measure if they want to, if they don't want to. Um, with high school kids, uh, I try not to make it very complex. And so, yes, we have some kids who track what they eat and use a Whoop band and Oura ring. I'm sure there are other devices as well that I'm forgetting right now. Um, but at the end of the day, like my goal with kids is to create consistent touch points. And so if we create consistent touch points we're going to start to develop habits with that person and start to develop this idea that like, hey, we're going to know based off conversation, like, hey, this person maybe isn't sleeping as much as they should. Let's have that conversation with them. Nutritionally, for a 140, 150 pound high school kid, I don't really want them to stress about like tracking exact calories and um, you know you know stressing too much about food quality and all this stuff that I might want an overweight adult who says I want to lose 20 pounds to track. A lot of times with those kids, it's just trying to get in better habits and routines, right? So what are the processes that you can start doing that are going to lead towards better outcomes? And so a lot of times you talk to high school kids, no matter how much they know on because of social media, because they're interested and look up baseball stuff, and they know more about pitching than 15-year-olds did a decade ago, and I fully believe that just from exposure to information. They it's still the low hanging fruit of the habits of, hey, did you eat breakfast today? Hey, like let's make sure you have a snack during the day. Hey, if you want to gain weight, you probably want to eat in a neighborhood of 500 extra calories a day, um, and consistently do that day over day. And so a lot of times, like the typical high school kid nutrition will look like Monday through Friday morning looks the way they want it, and then they eat whatever Friday night, they sleep in Saturday, skip breakfast, have like one solid meal, do the same thing Sunday, come back Monday and like, oh, how come I haven't gained weight? It's like, well, you just under ate for 48 straight hours. And so if you were a student and you ask a kid, hey, what are good grades? And they say, oh, A's and B's. It's like, okay, if you have 21 meals in a week, well, let's use 20 to make it a round number. If you have 20 meals in a week, that means that at least 16 of them, just to get 80%, at least 16 of them are like the way you'd want them to be. And it's a very low percentage of kids who actually do that. In terms of saying like, oh, they're A students nutritionally, and they're 18 or 19 for 20 in terms of like eating meals that they'd be proud of, or that we would be proud of them for eating. And so it's just trying to create that mindset of whatever you're currently doing, let's try to do more of it, or let's try to do a better job with it. We're definitely a little more process focused than outcome focused on the nutrition side. And part of that is like we don't want to have a scenario where someone goes on a crazy bulk diet for 3 months and then disregards all of it when they get in season, right?
Right.
Because like I said, we try to create consistent touch points with kids. Our pricing model is set up so we try to get kids in 3 or 4 days a week. We have some kids who do 5 or 6, but we have more 4-day-a-week kids than we do 1-day-a-week kids, on purpose. Um, but we want to create processes that when they go in season, they only see us 0 to 1 times a week based off time, that they stick with those. Because if we've all had a number of kids that gain 15 pounds in the off season, do everything right, and then they get in season, the habits aren't really there, they're not really formed, they fall apart, they come back in 3 months, they're 15 pounds lighter. And it's like, oh, we're back at square one. And that's not necessarily the goal, right? The goal is to create processes that you can keep using, not just in season, but year over year for people. And I guess it's a long-winded answer of saying a way of saying I don't really track calories with high school kids or exact nutritional like macronutrients. I try to influence the processes the habits that they're forming consistently more than anything.
Yeah, it's hard to keep those habits in the summer. These guys are playing like 30 travel ball games in 35 days, and they're all over the country and all that stuff. That makes it difficult. But yeah, no, it's good to focus on the process, and then at least they're aware, what it's going to take to, hit those goals, because everybody has those goals of going on and playing college baseball. Netting Professionals is proud to be the official netting partner of the Cape Cod League and the New England Collegiate Baseball League. Netting Professionals is in the sports business of improving athletic programs one facility at a time. Netting Professionals designs, fabricates, and installs custom netting, wall padding, windscreen, batting practice equipment, and much more for high schools, colleges, commercial facilities, and stadiums throughout the United States, while providing high-quality products and great service to numerous baseball programs throughout the New England area. To learn more and to speak to a Netting Professionals representative today, visit them at nettingpros.com. Remember, when it comes to netting, it's netting professionals.
Are you serious about playing your sport in college? Do you need a flexible education that allows you to maintain your practice and competition schedules while also preparing you to succeed at the next level? You should check out the University of Nebraska High School. UNHS is accredited and offers more than 100 online courses, including NCAA-approved courses to protect your academic eligibility. Students could earn a UNHS diploma or take a single course for transfer credit. Courses are college prep, self-paced, and available 24/7, 365. Enroll anytime and take up to a year to complete a course. Visit highschool.nebraska.edu today.
Yep. All right, John, do you have a few minutes to do our 3 Up, 3 Down segment?
Let's do it.
Nice. I'm going to introduce you to our producer, David Yaz.
Yes, time again for the time-honored tradition of 3 Up, 3 Down. Let's do it.
3 Up, 3 Down.
It's a segment where I provide 3 questions about the sport of baseball to both of our panelists here who are completely unprepared for this. And today, for the first time ever, very exciting, we have the underrated or overrated version of 3 Up, 3 Down. And since I like playing sound effects, I'll do one for that too.
Overrated.
Or underrated.
You like that, Dan?
That's nice.
Okay. Let's see. John is the guest, so we'll have John answer the question first. Overrated or underrated? The Major League Baseball All-Star Game. Overrated or underrated?
Adult version, overrated. Child version, appropriately rated or underrated. I think the All-Star Game is meant for 7 to 14-year-old kids to have a summer night where they get home and like they love seeing all those guys. So I'll say underrated when you're a kid, overrated when you're an adult.
Interesting you say that.
I barely watch it at this point, but I didn't miss it from like 1998 to 2007 probably.
Interesting you say that because so many adults criticize the game for being boring, meaningless, stupid. Maybe it's not that the game has changed. Maybe it's just that we all got older because I remember loving it as a kid as well. Dan,
and I mean I feel like that's like anything you fall in love with as a kid. So where you just expect it to always bring the same memories when it's not really meant for you, right? You know, if we sat down and watched a cartoon movie we loved when we were 6 years old, we'd be like, why are we watching this? That to me is kind of the same. I think it's a great event for kids. I think it's, you know, not really tailored for us as much as we want it to be.
Dan, your thoughts, overrated or underrated?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I'm kind of in the same boat where I loved it as a kid. I used to watch it every year. Loved the Home Run Derby, like the All-Star Weekend. I was tuned in for the entire thing, and it's gotten to the point where I don't even watch it anymore. But I don't think that's unique to baseball. Like you look at basketball, they're always trying to figure out ways to spice it up because it's kind of lost its luster too. You got you know, players drafting teams now instead of just doing Eastern Conference versus Western Conference, or it's like American-born players versus the rest of the world.
Yeah. Football, even worse.
Yeah, I don't even know that they have
they don't even have a game.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So
baseball is still the best All-Star game.
Yeah, it probably is. I would agree with that.
Because it's the only one that is close to the actual game.
That's right. Because I think in most cases, they can compete at the same level they do in regular games, whereas in something like football, there's no way they're going to hit as hard as they hit during the real thing.
Yeah. No, but my little league actually didn't have an all-star game. They had an all-star team, and then you kind of like made a run in your district and then your state, and if you went on, you know, eventually you'd get to Williamsport. But we never just had that one all-star game where it was, you know, 9-on-9 for kids within the league.
I remember. I still have my trading card, my Dan Guttenplan third base for the 4th grade Phillies team with the little all-star logo on there. Congratulations.
I don't think it's increased in price at all.
Strangely, it hasn't. I'm waiting. Yep. All right, second question for 3 Up, 3 Down. Overrated or underrated? Shohei Ohtani playing both ways. Now, of course, he didn't pitch last season, but I believe he plans to pitch next season. He is viewed as a unicorn by many. Is he overrated or underrated in doing both? Dan, your thoughts first on this one.
Underrated. I think he's Not only is he probably one of the best hitters in all of baseball, but I would say he's like a top 5 pitcher too. When he's unbelievable. And that's why he got so much money, because you're basically signing an ace pitcher and number 3 hitter. So it's remarkable. Nobody's done it before him, and you'd probably have to go back to like Babe Ruth to find somebody who dominated in that way. Underrated for sure.
I don't know the answer to this question because I haven't played fantasy baseball in a while. But when you draft him on fantasy baseball, do you get both?
So you can't. You get.
I'm saying no.
when he's pitching, you don't get his offensive stats.
Really?
That's the way it works.
All right, John.
Yeah, so I'll go underrated. I would say, you guys probably looked at this section as like the 3 quick hits at the end. I could talk like basically sports talk, radio talk all day. And so just like I guess a fun fact about me, but I am a junkie for like sports talk radio and stuff like that. But I would go underrated. I think this is more a reflection on baseball becoming more of a regional sport over the last 20 years than, when we were growing up, it was like Sports Center. You check in, you see all the games around the league, you see all the highlights. Like if Shohei Ohtani were 20 years older, he'd be the biggest deal in sports, right? If this were 2002, 2003, or that era, like basically mid 90s to mid 2000s, the post strike up until pre everyone getting outed for steroids era, Ohtani would be like the biggest deal in sports. He'd be like Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, etc. But since then, baseball has shifted a lot more regional, where you kind of just tune into your local team and get a little bit of national news. If you want the national news, you don't just like turn on the first channel. You have to like seek it out through, whether it's MLB Network or articles online or watching highlights online or whatnot. There's no like very easily accessible national baseball roundup anymore. I don't even think Baseball Tonight exists anymore, right? Or if it does, it's in a different.
Might be on the MLB network. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but either way, like the fact that we're not sure where it is like, oh, that used to be like the thing, right? So I think Ohtani being underrated is more a reflection on the transition of baseball from everyone pays attention to the national standings into it's just regional and there's so many other options and stuff to watch now. But yeah, underrated as a player. He's the best player of the generation. He's the best one we've seen since Bonds or really that era. But I think you get 1 to 3 of these guys every 20 years that you see, and you're like, wow, like we're going to talk about that guy for a long time. That's who Ohtani is right now.
Yeah, I'm with both of you. I think if you're an all-star pitcher and an all-star hitter, even if you're not the best at those things in the league, in theory, you should win the MVP every year. You're doing the job of 2 men. It's not, again, people said it, not since Babe Ruth. It's crazy. It's crazy.
And he stole 50 bases last year too, which is
incredible. He's 3 players. He's 4 players now. All right, final question for 3 Up, 3 Down. Overrated or underrated? Pete Rose's hits record, I should say, I guess. Pete Rose, we lost him last year, so I bring it up. He had 4,256 hits. I'm old enough to remember, you guys aren't, when he passed Ty Cobb at some point in the 80s. But of course, he's got a very mixed reputation given his history with gambling. He was never let back into the baseball Hall of Fame or baseball kind of at all after that. John, we'll let you go first on this one. Pete Rose's hit record, overrated or underrated?
Yeah, my initial thought was fairly rated. I don't think people look at him as a top 10 hitter of all time. He's not Ruth, he's not Williams, he's not one of those guys in terms of the average and the dominant seasons. He played forever. He hit a little bit over 300 career, but maybe one of you guys can check that. I think he hit like 301 or 302 career across like 25 seasons. So he kind of just was a very good player for a long time. He was never like the best in his sport. You could argue that he wasn't the best on his team for a lot of those years, especially with the Reds in the 70s. Like I think Joe Morgan won a couple MVPs while he was on the team. Johnny Bench won a couple while he was on the team. And so I think fairly rated. if anything, a little underrated because we don't think of Pete Rose as an all-time great hitter. We think of him as the guy who got banned from baseball to his own, faults there. So it's not like we put that on him, but I would say underrated to fairly rated, just to wrap that up.
Good thoughts. 303 lifetime batting average. Is that what you said?
I said 301 or 302. Okay, slightly higher.
Right. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, many argue he was a glorified singles hitter, or maybe just a singles hitter. But Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I would probably I'm leaning overrated just because I'm looking at his hits are 4,256, but he has 3,215 singles. And singles over time have become a little overrated, I feel like, because, now walks are just as valuable. He didn't walk a ton. His on-base percentage was 375, so we've definitely seen guys with higher on-base percentages, certainly like Barry Bonds and some of those guys that got walked all the time. So I want to say the hits record may be overrated, but then he's won an MVP. He's won 3 World Series. He's won 3 batting titles. 3 seems like it would be more for the career leader in hits. 2 Gold Gloves, a Rookie of the Year. So I'm going to go overrated and just say too many singles.
So what is underrated about Pete Rose, because I agree with everything you said there, is the fact that he played 5 different positions in his career, like started full seasons at 5 different positions. And so he's the answer to a great trivia question, because he played in the All-Star Game at all 5 of those positions.
Wow.
And so and he's the only guy to do that. So a little bit underrated from a standpoint of like, he was the guy who you had to keep in the lineup, and wherever he fit on the field based off other players, you just put him there and he figured it out. But maybe a little overrated in terms of if people are considering him like one of the 5 to 10 greatest hitters to ever play.
Yeah, and the thing that as I was saying that, he had 3,200 singles, but that still leaves 1,000 extra base hits, which, 500 home runs is a huge landmark, 500 doubles is a big one. So he had a ton of extra base hits too. So I don't know, maybe he is underrated. Who knows?
Among the, it's interesting to look at the top 10 hits leaders, because, Rose set the mark decades ago, still unthreatened with that number 4256. You want to guess there are 2 players who played in the 2000 or post 2000 that make this list. You guys want to guess?
What, and the list goes how far?
The top 10, sorry.
Top 10.
Take the top 10 hits leaders of all time. There are only 2 of them that I believe played post 2000.
Pujols?
Yeah,
Pujols is one. Very good.
Is Jeter the other?
And Jeter's the other. Wow,
yeah.
You guys are good. Yeah, Jeter is 6th all time. 27-47. And wait a minute, no, I'm looking at this wrong. Jeter 34-65, just a few more than Collier Yastrzemski, who's 8th, and Pujols is 9th. And Paul Molitor, I don't think played post 2000, but he's 10th. Anyway, terrific job on 3 Up, 3 Down to you both. And I have Pete Rose bobbleheads dolls headed out to the 2 of you. But don't bet on it, as they say. You get it?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Dan, back to you to wrap things up.
All right. Thanks to Cressey Sports Performance co-owner John O'Neill for joining us on the Base Path Podcast. Rate, review, subscribe to the Base Path Podcast on your preferred platform. Thanks to our producer, David Yaz. The Base Path Podcast is a Siemens Media production.